Good. Hello? Hello? Can everybody hear me? Hello, welcome. How many people have reimagined their apps and built something last night? Something fast and fluid, I hope? No bingo yet? Okay. I'll see what I can do in terms of playing up to buzzword bingo this morning. My name is Joe Stegman. I am the group program manager for the XAML team on Windows. I'll be your, in honor of our closeness to the House of Mouse, I'll be your tour guide for the next hour. And I'll be talking about XAML and Windows 8 for building Metro-style apps. Now, how many people actually came to this conference thinking there might not be a big XAML presence here? A few, huh? Well, I'm here to tell you that's not the case. So, fortunately for all you, or I hope all of you, your XAML skill sets are preserved and you'll have a good long life developing Metro-style apps on Windows 8, and I'm here to talk about that experience and what's new, what's different, and what's changed. So with that, welcome. How many people would not consider themselves experienced at all in XAML? I see a few, just a few. So for those people, I'm really it's a kind of a 200 level session. I'm talking at a high level. So hopefully you don't get lost, but if anybody didn't get lost from trying to drink from the fire hose of the last day and a half, then good for you. That's all I can say, because there's a lot of content out there. But effectively, I will stay at somewhat a higher level, and then I'm going to defer to some of the other XAML sessions later on today and other non-XAML sessions for some more details. That being said, I am going to show code. I'll spend some time in Visual Studio. It should be a fun little journey, I hope. So the overall agenda, what I want to cover today is I'm going to do what I'll say is a quick recap, since the name of this session is what you need to know. Part of that means that I have to know what you already know, so I don't cover that, because in order to cover what you need to know, I have to know what you already know. You get the idea. So I'm going to give you a recap and tell you what I think you know. And if you don't know that, I'm sorry. I'm assuming you know that. Then I'll move on and actually spend the bulk of my time not telling poor jokes like that. I'll spend the bulk of my time on what's new, different in XAML UI, and I'll try to spend some time explaining why it's different, why it's new. If we did something different than you're used to, why do we do something different than you're used to? And I'm going to finish up talking about some concepts, what I'll say are related to the app model, that as a XAML developer, you need to be aware of. In some cases, they're more closely tied to the XAML app model. In other cases, they aren't, but as a XAML developer, you may expect them to be related to the XAML app model. So I hope that today when you leave here that you really get an understanding of, as a XAML app developer on Windows 8 for someone building Metro-style apps and reimagining their app, that you kind of get the bootstrap of what you need to know to be able to start doing that. So there are people, though, who built XAML apps last night. Anybody do that? On their new box? No? Nobody did? I did it. There's a couple people. Good. How was the experience? Good? They're kind of, yeah, whatever. Someone said crap. I don't believe them. What's that? Did you say crap? Crashed. Oh, sorry. You were, yeah, anyway. I'll save my HTML joke for later. But sorry if that happened. It does happen occasionally. It may happen when I'm doing my demo. It is pre-beta software, and I'm sure you'll get tired of hearing that as well. So back to my talk. I got a lot to cover. Where I'm going to spend my cycles, you probably saw this in the keynote today, where I'm spending my cycles today is really on building these Metro-style apps with XAML, and I'll talk a little bit about the application model. People who are used to building .NET Framework apps, there's a wealth of APIs available for building .NET Framework apps, and effectively that are non-UI or non-XAML based. And in Windows 8, those APIs are called the WinRT APIs, and they're for communication, data, those sorts of things. I'm not going to be spending any cycles talking about the lower level APIs. I'm just going to focus on the UI stack. So moving on, people who have their boxes already, popped them up. You'll notice there's some apps in there, the Checkmate app, Zero Gravity. These are actually XAML apps. And hopefully what you took from the keynote yesterday and the general sessions yesterday is that, hey, as a XAML developer, I can actually bring my assets, I can bring my skill sets, I can move them forward, I can start building Metro-style apps, and that's exactly what we have, a set of apps that are shipping on the box that you've got, that we just had XAML developers build these apps just using their existing skill sets. And you'll be able to do the same thing when you're building Metro-style apps, and I'll talk about kind of things you need to be aware of when you're doing that. You can bring over your existing assets, and I'm going to go into a little more detail on that. And finally, one of the new things is that XAML and C++, they're built to be great together, and that was one of the design goals that we went into in Windows 8, is we wanted to make sure that XAML worked well with C++. Are there any C++ developers in the audience? Anybody? Wow, look at that. Well, you'll be happy to know that instead of MFC in the future, you'll be able to use something like a XAML, and that'll be carried forward with the platform, so I think you'll find better support with that moving forward. So moving on. So some of the things that may not have been obvious in the keynote, and I know I've been asked about this by a couple people. They said, hey, we saw Antoine port an app. You know, it seemed like a pretty basic app. How much of my stuff actually carries forward? Well, it turns out, I think you'll be surprised. Most of it does. Pretty much most of the stuff carries forward. I think the problems that most people will have when they're moving assets or their skill sets from one to the other won't be in taking their control assets and moving them forward. It's because we have the same in Windows 8. It's the same control model, the same basic controls, the same tags, same properties. VSM still exists. The animation stuff still exists. It's still pretty much exactly what you're used to if you're a Silverlight or Phone or WPF developer. Still have the same content model and items control model for doing data-bound list controls. The data binding system still works the same. In some cases, the differences are it was just ported down to a native layer, but that's really the main thing you can think about, is that it's the same thing, just now native and now shipping inbox on Windows 8. And mentioned before is that C#, C++, and VB are all really first-class languages for this. But the last one is the one I want to spend a little bit of cycles on right now, which is that what it means to actually be part of the Windows runtime. And the XAML stack that ships in Windows is part of the Windows runtime. And the way you can think of what that means, and hopefully as a developer, you probably don't notice other than the fact that it's just shipping in box, and that means you don't have to add reference to windows.ui.xaml. It's just part of every app, or it's part of every app you build already has that, if you will, that assembly imported because they're just automatically included because they're part of Windows. But the main thing, though, is that when we built this XAML stack, you can think of the way that WPF or Silverlight was built was that those things were constructed using C# and, for the most part, using a managed language, and the end result was it produced IL, and then anybody using a managed language, you know, VB, F#, whatever, could consume this IL. So you can think of IL was being the layer that any managed layer knew how to consume, or managed language knew how to consume. In Windows 8, effectively, you can think of that layer being moved down into the platform and now called WinRT. And so when you expose something via WinRT, you've exposed it in such a way that it can automatically be consumed in C++, C#, VB. So all we did in, you can think of for the XAML layer, is we just exposed it as WinRT APIs. Everything was made native and exposed as WinRT APIs. And as an artifact of that, you could think of it, it was really a design decision, but as an artifact, it just becomes naturally consumable in C++, C#, and VB. So the key thing is we don't have wrappers for C# or VB. We don't have different implementations for C++. It's all the exact same code, no layer, no differences between the two. You're using the button control in C# or the button control in VB. It's the exact same. No difference whatsoever. No layers whatsoever. So it just means that as we're evolving that, every language gets in the same, whether you're a C++ developer or a C# developer. So I'm going to quickly jump into some code here. And what I want to show is not this sample. I'm going to create a new project, and I'm in Visual Studio 11 Express for Windows Developer Preview. Yes, so you all have that in your box that you got. This is basically an Express edition for developing Windows Metro-style apps. And I'm going to start with a C# Metro-style app, and let's call it, how about Old School? Not the movie, like me, Old School. And what I want to show here is that one of the things that was talked about and that I mentioned already was that there's a lot of continuity in the control model between Silverlight and WPF and Windows 8. I'm going to build a Windows 8 app here, so this should all look familiar to everybody. I'm going to have a button, and I want you guys to be able to read it, so I'll set font size equal 50, and we'll set content just looks exactly like what you would do today in any other XAML framework, if you will. And let's do old school. And that's it. So somewhat of a similar hello world type sample. I'm going to hit F5, and the default experience is I haven't I didn't say bring up the simulator, so it's going to actually just run it here on my box. It'll install it, and I get this nice little button. Nothing too fancy. I'm going to swipe back. Thank you. Did the people on my team show up today? Thank you. Is that my mom back there? Yeah, she's a big fan too. Okay, it gets better, but hey, if you want to applaud for that, great. Thank you. Wasn't expect. I'm rather shocked now. So, Shift F5. I'm going to stop debugging just to let you know what I'm doing. So, okay, that worked great. So let's do something else. Hopefully, if you're familiar with XAML, you'll be familiar with. I'm going to do a user control.resources. And I have an empty resources section. So, I'd like to shove something in there. I'm going to Alt-Tab to the desktop. And I happen to have a link here to documentation for Silverlight. It brought it up in the Metro style browser. I'm just going to make the demo easier. There's a little icon you can click on the Metro style browser that says use desktop view. That brings up the same page in desktop view. But this is the MSDN documentation for the Silverlight button. And on it, it has the style for the Silverlight button. So what I'm going to do is just grab that whole thing. So just Silverlight code sitting out on the web somewhere, and I'm going to go back into not that app, go back into old school, and I'm just going to paste it in there. Paste it in there. Wait for it. Wait for it. Who said crash? Control V. Wait for it. Oh, look at that. People are already driving my demos. Okay, we'll try this. Oh, wrong browser. It's okay. I'm a professional. I've done this before. I've made mistakes before. So let's see. Bring it up. Make sure I hit Control C. I like to repeat what I'm doing here. Control V. It's okay. It gets better, really. We'll just repaste. Really. I've been here before. I Control C. Click. Control V. Yay! Hey, there you go. See, I told you. Right. Okay. This is not a hard demo, man. Jeez. I'm going to Control F. Find and replace here. Now, I'm looking for one thing, VSM : and I'm going to replace that with nothing. So what I'm doing is in the Silverlight style, you had to declare VSM. It's kind of baked in Windows 8. So I'm going to get rid of all those. That's all I did. Nothing else. Just took the code, full control model, run, nothing else, compiles. And you'll see this is how compatible it is. Just taking the Silverlight code. There is the Silverlight button style, the whole control model working exactly on a Windows 8 box. So things are really consistent between what you're used to doing in Silverlight and WPF and what you may be doing today or what you may be doing in the future on Windows 8. So I'm going to tab it back in there and Shift F5 to stop my debugging session. So just to really beat a dead horse, because I know you guys really want me to do this. I'm going to do it. I'm going to create a C++ project, because I think there's skeptics in the audience who don't believe me that it's the same. So, mostly my mom. That was a joke. People are going, really? Are you going to really show C++? I am. So, I'm going to take the exact same sample, Control A, Control V. What is with me today? Hey, see, it was just being slow. And I'll just change the name up front, but this is a C++ project, old school, 1, hit F5, yes, C++, of course, I want to build a debug version. Now we're going to wait. I didn't pre-prime it, but this is precompiled headers. C++ developers are used to this. The first time you do it, it takes a little bit of time, but I assure you, you come up, you see the exact same XAML, exact same control model. It's all the exact same. We'll now be working in C++. Here we go. It's coming. And there it is. Same old thing. So same between the two. Thank you. Go back, hit Shift F5, and we'll get on with some more PowerPoint here. So that's, where's my clicker? That's basically showing some stuff you're used to and Silverlight brought forward and some new C++ stuff. But the main thing is that I think you'll be pleasantly surprised how similar things are between old school XAML, if you will, Silverlight, WPF, and the Metro style stuff. So, though, there must be something different. There must be a reason you're here. And there is. There's some things that are new. There's some things that are changed. And I want to articulate some of those, but also give you some insight into why these things are new or why they're different. C++ I talked about, so I won't beat that dead horse. The look and feel of Windows 8 is new. It's updated. So the controls by default have a, is it flickering? So AV folks, I got it. Oh, okay. Oh, I see there's somebody up here. Are you actually pulling the cable out or are you putting it? Are you from Apple? I think he is. So we updated the controls to give them a Metro style look and feel, and hopefully I'll try to not use Metro style again. But part of that is about making them such that they match the look and feel of Windows 8, but part of it is about updating them so that they work well with, he's doing something. My clicker's no longer working. Oh, there we go. That they're updated to support and work well with touch and mouse. Now, you may think, okay, it doesn't seem like a noteworthy point, but this is probably one of the few things that you will probably notice a difference between Silverlight and WPF, which is touch and mouse. And you go, well, why? Why would you change anything here? Well, you can think of, if you're used to phone development or the way that they did things on phone, there are a couple of ways we could have handled this. Is that we wanted to add touch support and touch events. So currently today, you have like right mouse button down and you have left mouse button down and mouse press, but there's specific mouse events. And we could have added another set of touch events, but then all the developers who are building would go, okay, so let's see, I got to handle the mouse events and the touch events. Instead, the goal was to sit back and say, hey, let's try to unify those a little bit so that you don't have to think about both mouse and touch when you're programming. You just think about a concept of what I'll call pointer in general. And so we have pointer down and pointer pressed and tap and hold, which is the concept of, I'll do it over here. If I press and hold that, you should see, hey, that's not a touch screen. Okay, I need to be doing it on my, I'll show it to you later. But so I've been practicing on my monitor, which is a touch screen. So go figure. So anyway, there's concepts like touch and hold, which is a logical right mouse button click. So instead of making it so you had to respond to two sets of events, we unified them and changed them, and now you have a sort of a unified set of pointer events. And Olner is giving a talk, I think, tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, which I'm sure all of you will get up for because the attendee party is tonight. But you'll want to see that one. But he's going to talk in more detail about some of the things we've done from a touch and mouse perspective. But that is one of the areas that if you may find that there are some changes in there. The namespace is different. Another one where you go, well, why change the namespace? So this wasn't a, hey, we like purity. Let's change the namespace to something different. You can think about as part of building these APIs in Windows, there was more unification that needed to happen than just the XAML stack. There are other things that live in Windows. There's imaging APIs, and there's media APIs, and there's font APIs. And part of what we wanted to do was make sure you didn't have two ways to deal with fonts. You didn't have two ways to deal with colors, or three ways to deal with colors. And so part of that meant let's take all this stuff, unify it under one spot in Windows, make sure we're all using the same base types, if you will, for color, those sorts of things. And as part of that unifying process as well, we took the XAML APIs and moved them into Windows. And after all, they ship in Windows. So from a developer perspective, this makes it super clear that you're using APIs that are directly a part of Windows. Now, similar to the previous things, with the exception of maybe the mouse pointer stuff, This is not going to be what causes you any headache in terms of moving apps. I've spent a lot of time moving apps between phone and Silverlight and the Windows 8 stuff and the namespaces. You'll spend less time doing it than I just spent monologuing about it. There's new controls. I'm going to talk about those in a minute and show some demos. The Windows runtime. So effectively, if you're a .NET developer, you're used to programming against the .NET framework. And there are still a lot of language features in the .NET framework that you continue to use in the .NET framework. But there are lots of other APIs that you may be used to, accessing the network, accessing the file system. These APIs are now part of the Windows runtime. Now, first thing is okay, really, what changes? Well, the APIs are different. But in terms of how you consume the APIs, it's almost transparent to you as a developer. When you're using the file system APIs on Windows 8, other than the API names being different, and them being async, which takes a little bit of time getting used to, and I think Alesh talked about why things are async. But other than that, you don't really notice that it feels like you're programming against part of the .NET framework. When you're using the networking stack, you really don't think of, is this part of the .NET framework or not? You don't care as a developer. It's transparent to you. And so once you start building apps, I think that'll sink in more. But the main thing is that you can think of that the .NET framework that you're used to programming against, in general, a lot of the things you'll be doing now, you'll be using the Windows runtime, but that just means the API names are different, but the way you program against them still feels the same. It's just a different set of file system APIs, and there's a good reason they're different. There are talks all week that are going to talk about the different non-UI APIs in the Windows runtime, and they go into some of the reasons why some of the APIs are a little more different than you might expect from what you're used to in the .NET framework. And I encourage you to either watch those on demand or go to those talks. Deployment, obviously, is going to be different because everything you deploy for Metro-style app is deployed and updated through the store. There are store talks that go into details on that. And one thing that just may not be 100% clear is that the Metro-style XAML APIs, those APIs are designed for building Metro-style apps, not for building desktop apps. And they actually, it turns out, they're tied into in many ways with the deployment model for Metro-style apps through the store. They're tied in with the package. And so it wasn't really easy to separate them out and make them, say, more generally desktop friendly. And they're really not designed necessarily for desktop use. They're designed for this touch-centric, reimagined app experience. But the APIs that I'll talk about and show today are for building Metro-style apps. And the last thing, I think the biggest thing that you'll have to think about if you're moving content from either phone or Silverlight or WPF to Windows 8 is reimagining the app. And I know there are people now are rolling their eyes and going, whatever. But this is something that you actually do have to think about. It's that if you have an app like Control Panel here shown on the right, if you have an app that shows a lot of content that is something that's more of a productivity tool, you may want to keep that as a desktop app. But if you want to build this more touch-centric experience where your content owns all the pixels displayed on the screen, and you have to think about designing that in a different way, whether it's more space in terms of between your controls, whether it's how you actually get to additional data through gestures such as a swipe. It is actually a fairly, once you get used to it, it's not a big deal, but it is something that you have to spend a lot of cycles thinking about, hey, how will my app work in this content-centric focused world? And that's probably what's going to be the biggest change for you if you're moving an app from point A to point B. So with that, I think I'm going to do a quick little demo here. So I'm going to hit the Windows key, and that takes me to the Start screen. And I'm going to go over and hit Memories app. And this is an app developed by a couple folks on our team, and they're just XAML developers. And this is kind of that experience that I was talking about, or Jensen talked about yesterday. You can see, I think I got touch visualization on there, so you can see where my finger is. So it's a app designed where you don't see any Chrome in this app at all. What you see is just the content in the app. And so this is a digital memories app. And I think Marco's talking after me, and he's going to show a few more details on this app. But effectively, think of it as I can collect my digital memories together and put them in an album. And so this is a viewing experience for that. But again, you see it's all about the content. But I can do things such as I can edge down from the top, there we go, and get access to, if you will, my commands. But so in the XAML world, we have a set of controls that allow you to do exactly that, and I'll be talking about that experience. We have a set of, whoops, edge back in to get rid of it, or not, Light dismiss. Nice. Okay. Go back. There we go. Anyway, this very content-centric experience has this concept of you want to bring up, when you want to do something to your content, like edit it, you bring up the app bar for displaying commands. If you want to do something like print, you'd come over and interact with something like the charms. If you want to set app-specific settings, you'd do something like integrate with the settings charm, or if you want to print, you'd integrate with the devices charm, and Paulo will talk about doing the devices charm, I think, in a talk tomorrow. But that's the kind of experience you're thinking about building, this content-focused experience. And so I want to show a couple of the new controls that we've got to enable you to build an experience more like this. So I'm going to Windows key to get back, and then I'll move back to my desktop. I have an app here. I'm going to close the previous app. I have I'll say a slight Julia Childs app here that I'm going to run real quickly. This is the app that, it's an early version of the app that Antoine showed yesterday, but this is effectively an app Scott did. And all it is a list box bound to some data from a Bing image search. So it does a Bing image search. So given that we're close to Disney, I have to do safe searches. Disney's kind of a safe search, I think. So I can do a safe, see that's rainbows, sunshine, unicorns, all the good stuff we like to see in crowds like this. So it's not a great looking app, but what I do want to show you is I'm going to Shift F5 to stop debugging. All it's doing is basic XAML stuff. It's got a stack panel, and this is a Windows 8 app. Stack panel, text block, text box, all the exact same code that you're used to doing if you're a XAML developer, and a list box that is bound to the data source, and that's basically the data source returned from the Bing query. And it's using a data template to display the content. And for people who aren't familiar with templates, either in ASP.NET or a XAML technology, effectively it says, I'm going to bind this list to a set of data, and for each item in that data, I want to generate an image control. And for the image control, use the source being a thumbnail URL. And just to show you real quick, the content returned from Bing, just really quick, you'll see that this data, I do a search. This is actually the XML returned from Bing, and the search has a bunch of image results. And for each image result, it has like a title, it has a full-size image URL, and it has a thumbnail URL, which is this part down here. And I'm just binding to the thumbnail URL. That's all that's happening there. But right now, it's not a great-looking app. And I'm going to start walking through some of the new controls we've got and start building out this UI as I'm doing that using some of the new controls. After I first explain what the new controls are and why they're valuable. So now I'm going to get into some of the specific new things we've done from a XAML app UI perspective. But first, one more minor segue into, as you're developing an app, the first thing a user does when they interact with your app is they interact with a tile. And they click on the tile, and the tile launches the splash screen. So the tile itself, there is a ton of stuff you can do with a tile to keep your app really effectively look like it's running when it's not running. And that's worthy of a talk itself. And in fact, someone named Kip Olson is doing a talk on tiles and updating tiles. And but it's full worth viewing at least on demand if you can't go to the talk, because there is a ton you can do to your live tile. But the stuff you do to the tile is not XAML-specific stuff, and I'm not covering it here. The way you set up your tile is in the app manifest, which you can get to from Visual Studio. But again, I'm not going to cover the tile in detail. The same with the splash screen. Works the same in many ways, very similar to Silverlight or the phone. I won't go into details of that either. I'm starting right here, which is once you're activated, you're building out your UI. So in the XAML world, all the controls that you're used to, they still exist. And this is a screenshot of what they look like with the new Metro style, if you will. I'm going to focus on the items in red here, which is the grid view, list view, and flip view, and kind of giving you an intro of those. There's talks later on today and tomorrow on the XAML session that does really a deep dive on these controls, because there really is a lot you can do with these controls. But I want to kind of give you an intro of what you can do. The only thing to really call out on here, other than the Metro style, is there are some new features, or not new features, but some controls with new names. Most of them have the same name, but the web view on there is what you would know as a web browser control, but it's now called the web view. The text box is still the text box, but now it has some additional features that you may not be used to in Silverlight, such as spell checking. Topalo is talking about that in his talk. I think it's tomorrow. We'll go into more details on that. There's a progress ring and a toggle switch that are relatively new. If you've used foam before, you may have used them from Toolkit. But there are a couple new controls there. But the main heavy lifting for building these Metro-style apps are really the grid view, list view, flip view, and semantic zoom. And that's, again, what I'll focus on all of those except semantic zoom, which Hamid will cover in his talk. So the list view and grid view. So first thing is new list controls. Why do I need those? So hopefully I can articulate at least a little bit of why we have these new controls. And of course, they have the new look and feel, but you go, we could have done that to some of the existing controls, and we did to the list control. But they're also designed for touch. And yes, our list control works with touch as well. But what's different, and one of the different things is there's a new selection model. And Jensen talked about this yesterday. And Hamid will talk about that in his talk later on today, which is there are some new selection models for doing single selection and multi-selection. And these new list and grid controls support those models. They support both UI and data virtualization, which Hamid will talk about as well. And they support grouping, which if you have your data shaped in the correct way, you can now do grouping automatically, and I believe Lawrence Mulroney is talking about this in his data talk. But this set of features was such that it felt a little bit much to try to cram into another control. So instead, it felt very natural to create a couple set of new controls: a grid view that supports the grouping and is more of the horizontal type control, and the list view, which is basically a vertical oriented control. So with that, let me just show you them, because by showing you, I think you get a better understanding of how these things work. So the nice thing about the implementation of these controls is that even though they're new control names, the concepts, the control model, how they do data binding, how they use templates, is all what you're used to if you're a XAML developer. So this is the same sample I just showed you, but I'm going to do similar to what Antoine did, but I'm going to try to explain it in a little more detail. I'm going to pull over a grid view. And first of all, on the list box here, you can see the only thing that the list box does is it has an item template. Otherwise, there's really no styling other than the margin, and it's setting a grid row. It's really pretty basic. And that's the same with the grid view. But to really kind of drive the point home, though, of what I'm doing here, I'm just going to copy my grid view control. And rather than drag in another set of source, I'm just basically replacing that list control with my grid view. And the only other thing I want to do, get rid of all this other stuff, because it's the same. I'm binding to the same item template, the exact same content. I'm doing some stuff down below, which just turns off the selection mode. That's it. Otherwise, I just replaced list control with grid view. Nothing else, no magic. I'm not doing anything behind the scenes. So when I run this app, again, there's no magic. I don't have some predefined code that says, hey, make this pretty for the audience, kind of a thing. That's the experience you get. Same template, same everything. That's the experience I get by default. So you can see, for what I had with the list control, exact same template with the grid view control now, I get this much more natural experience for when you're building an app where the content itself owns all the pixels on the screen. So the model we use to do that, though, the control model, how you do the data binding, exactly the same as what you're used to today. In fact, I just reused the same template to build this app as I did in the previous version. But as you can see, it looks a lot nicer. And I don't know if it's jerky there, but it's definitely a little more fluid. So anyway, that's grid view real quick. And I'll talk a little bit more about grid view, but Hamid will go into details about some of the many things you can do with the grid view, like grouping and the selection models, as will Lawrence. So I'm going to Shift F5 to stop debugging here. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And I'll come back to list view as well. So other XAML UI controls that we've got, for people who are used to Silverlight, and Silverlight was great for playing back media, but one of the first things you had to do was go find a UI for playing back your media. Silverlight had this thing called Media Element, but it was UI-less. So the first thing you had to do was build UI to play back your media. In Windows 8, we have a default media player so that you have UI that you don't have to build out, which is nice. Yay. Toggle switch and progress ring I talked about. Flip view, I'll show you a demo of in a minute, and I'll go into more details there. And the last thing is there's a jump viewer control, and this is the semantic zoom control. And Haman will talk about that more in his controls list binding deep dive talk. But this is the thing that allows you to do a semantic type zoom between two levels of detail. So you can have, if you have a list of albums for playing music, for example, you can have a view that shows you every album, and then you may shrink down to a view that just shows you the letters, so you can quickly the letters of the album name. So like A, B, C, D, for example. Anyway, not explaining it well, but Hamid will take care of that tomorrow. What I want to do next, though, is show you out of these controls, the one I'll demo now is the flip view, but the media player, toggle switch, and progress ring should be pretty self-explanatory, and jump viewer, again, Hamid will go into more details tomorrow. So, flip view. So why would I want to use this sort of thing? And I think it's one of those things that, again, demos a little better than talking about it. So I'm going to pull over a flip view control. And you'll notice, maybe you won't, I'm binding to the exact same data source. There's no special styling. I'm using the exact same item template that I used before. Margin, everything is exact same. Visibility is collapsed. We don't want that. You would not see it. There's a reason for that. I'll get into that in a minute. But not for the demo, for the next part of the demo I do. Let me comment out the grid view. So all I've done is I've turned off the grid view. We have a flip view going to the exact same content. F5 to run it. What kind of experience do I get? By default, using the same templates I used before. Well, that's less than overwhelming, what do you say? I don't know, I kind of like it, but it seems like we're wasting a lot of space here. So the grid view is great for displaying the thumbnails. This, you can see, nice experience, nice smooth experience here. As I'm flipping, things are kind of falling into place on snap points. That is a feature that you can do your own snap points and, if you will, your own rules for how you want to snap your content. That's something Olner will be talking about in his touch talk, I think later on today. But the flip view has this built-in for each item, if you will. It has a built-in, does a snap point as you're navigating through these items. But anyway, this content is clearly, with a thumbnail, is clearly less than stunning. So let's go back, and this is just Shift F5 to stop debugging. I'm just using standard XAML templates. So I had mentioned before that data source or the data that I get back has a thumbnail view, and that's actually what I'm using now. But I have another template pre-canned called Big View, and it's doing pretty much the same thing as the other one, only rather than binding to the thumbnail view, it's binding to the full-size image, and it's called Big View. Just the exact same way that you would do this in list control or items control in Silverlight or WPF. I have a different template, and I'm just going to pick that different template. Let's go ahead and run it and see what kind of experience you get now. Now, I will say is that this experience, I am getting real images from a real service from Bing, and what Bing does is it mines these images from who knows where's website, and you're seeing them now, so not filtered, not cached, not nothing, all live data. But now you can see, hey, that's a much better kind of experience that I'm looking for, is a full screen navigation of my content. And I get it again. There's no magic here. All I did is I just took my same data, bound it to the flip view, and I now get this kind of experience. So taking it a step further, thank you. Hopefully you're still with me. No doubt just awestruck. God, that guy's good. No, you are asleep, aren't you? My jokes are not even resonating. Shift F5, remember, stay focused, stay focused. Okay, so nice experience. Now what I'd really like is I want the best of both worlds, so let me do that real quickly. And uncommon out the grid view and go back to making this collapsed. And quickly show you how easy it would be to get both experiences. And I'm going to do item click event. Same, you can see this is Visual Studio, same experience you're used to with XAML development. I add an item click event. I'm going to add an event handler. And in the event handler, it'll be pretty basic, which is the flip view. FV is the name of the flip view. I'm saying, hey, flip view, make sure your selected item is the item I just clicked on. And then I call set view, which is the only thing that I have pre-canned. And all set view says is that make sure the thing that I'm passing in, the flip view in this case, is visible, and take all its siblings and hide them. So that's really pretty basic. So with that, now let's see if I can get this kind of, okay, that's the kind of experience I want. Now let's click on Pike Place Market. And now the image, just really, it's working. There it is. It just had to actually really go grab that image is what you're seeing. So you see really quick experience here of being able to build this kind of really immersive, content-focused experience for Metro-style apps. Now, next problem, which I'll get back to slides, but hey, nice, I want to go back to my other view. I want to go back to my details view. How do I do that? So hey, it feels like I need some way to do that. I'm not going to use navigation. I could. Marco will talk about that. I'm going to use app commands, but I'm going to monologue about those first. So I'm going to swipe back in again, go back to Visual Studio, Shift F5 to kill the app. And let's go back to slides. So that's flip view. Now the next thing is that, okay, how do I actually go about adding commands? How do I, since it's content focused and I want to mostly hide the Chrome, when I want Chrome, how do I put that in there? And we have a new control in Windows 8 called the application bar, and that automatically does what you would expect in terms of making itself visible when somebody swipes in from the top or bottom. And if you remember when Jensen talked yesterday, Jensen said Windows owns swiping in from the left or right edge, and the application owns swiping in from the top or bottom. And so when you put an application bar in your app, when you swipe in from the top or bottom, what happens is the application bar will automatically display over your content, and you as a developer can add your own items into the application bar. In this case, I have 3 buttons down below, but I'll show you how to do that. There are models for how you want to dismiss it. Light dismiss means I tap outside the app bar, it goes away. I can have a time delay, or I can have it persistent. But again, I'll just give you a quick little demo of that, since it seems like we need it in this app. And the way you add an application bar is kind of exactly what you would expect. And again, this is going to look very hauntingly familiar for people who are used to XAML development, because the way it works is just an items control. I add my app bar in my code, and yes, I have pre-canned app bar, but just because I didn't want to type all that in, I set it up to light dismiss, but you'll see the stuff I put in it, in this case, is just a stack panel with a couple buttons in it. That's it. That's all it takes to do this. It's very simple, and what is the experience that gives me? Hit F5, run the app, go hit public market. I'm swiping in from the top, and there I see my app bar with home and save. I put 2 buttons in there. But now I have a mechanism by which I can now say, hey, go back to that main view. So let's go ahead and wire that up real quick, because it turns out it's pretty simple to do. But before I do that, there's one thing, just because this is the way I roll, that bugs me. Whoops. I'm OK. I got it. It's under control. I want to drag in some nicer looking buttons, just because I don't like those other buttons. These are use some icons to make the app look a little pretty. I want to show something that looks professional here, like I've been here before. So I dragged in those buttons, and now let me go ahead and add an event handler to the home one that says, let's see, click equals generate an event handler. And so now when I click that home button, I'm going to say set view, grid view. That basically, again, just says make the grid view displayed and hide all its siblings. It's that simple. And with that, only add a couple lines of code. Now let's see. We'll go to Pike Place Market, come in, swipe in from the top. You see slightly better icons now, looks a little more professional, and bam, I'm back to there. So now I've added UI, or commands, to my app fairly easily with some built-in controls for Windows 8. So, thank you. So, a couple final things. I've given you kind of a high-level overview at this point of some of the big new controls we've added, but we've actually added a bunch of features across the XAML stack, and these are additive features, not replace something you may be used to, such as our animations now, which maybe a lot of people may not matter to them that much, but they're what I call CPU-independent animations, which means when you swipe something, it's actually, that animation is happening on the GPU, which means it just means your animations are going to be smooth and buttery, the way you like them. And we've added support for Windows 8 animations. And John Papa is here to give you guys the details on what we've done there. He's got a talk, I think it's later on today, where he's going to be talking about that as part of the styling talk. 9-grid, John will talk about that as well. We got a 9-grid? Yeah. Was that a slow clap? Is he mocking me? He's a Photoshop guy, no doubt. Yes, we have 9-grid, so worthy of applause. It's hardware-accelerated 9-grid, if I could make you happier. So anyway, we have manipulations and gesture APIs that Olner will talk about, but effectively, let me try to do it right this time. If you watch, I have a touchscreen monitor. You can see there's a touch and hold. You see, all I did is I'm touching, holding, so that's like a logical right click that I talked about before that I wanted to show you before, and there it pops up the right click. That's the unification work that I was talking about before. But if you're doing something where I see two, where I'm doing a rotation like this, Windows has stuff in their APIs where they can expose the fact that rather than you having to try to figure out that that's a rotation, they can give that to you and say, oh, by the way, I have a rotation happening, or I have a swipe happening. So rather than you have to figure those things out, you can now get notification at a more abstract level that says, hey, someone just is doing this manipulation, or they're doing this gesture. And Olner will talk about that in more detail in his talk, but it makes it much easier for you to actually work with a touch-type experience. And we have actually a ton of features added to text, but the one I want to call out here is that we have we support multi-column text display through a feature that's actually a little bit more general than multi-column text display. It's not that per se, but you can use the feature to generate multi-column text. And Chapala will talk about that in his talk tomorrow. But this is just a set of some of the new features we've added. There's actually a lot of features across the stack that you'll find out in some of the other XAML talks that we've added in Windows 8. Now, segueing on to some other concepts that I think most people in here should be aware of when you're building XAML apps, because there are things that you may not necessarily recognize are not XAML concepts, or there are things that may have impact on how you design your UI. So the first one is, one of the things you heard yesterday is that Windows 8 is about a diversity of PCs. It's about mostly no PC left behind. And as part of that, you as a developer now have to think about not leaving any PCs behind. And some of the work is done for you, but some of the other work we can't help you much on. So things like screen size, you may be able to, actually got a slide I think that talks about screen resolution in more detail. You as a developer, you need to respond to, you may be able to use layout for dealing with screen resolution changes in your app, but there are APIs that tell you what the current screen resolution is and how you deal with size changes in your current screen resolution. And Tim Hewer's got a talk, I think, tomorrow, where, or is it Friday, wherever Tim is. Tim's got like 14 talks. This is one of them. But he's talking about techniques for how you might use XAML to deal with the sorts of things like screen resolution and changes in DPI. This is just telling you there are APIs that you can query that tell you what your current screen size is and to be notified when your screen size changes. And so you may want to do something different with your XAML. And again, that's what Tim's going to talk about. You have to worry about detecting orientation. I believe the boxes you picked up last night are locked to one orientation. But in the real world, you'll be able to have devices that switch around, and you may think it's just portrait and landscape, but actually gets more confusing because if you take it and you switch it this way and then you go that way, do you want it to be upside down or do you want it to just flip to be the right side? You know, you get the idea. If I take this thing and go like this, okay, I want portrait, then what happens when I do that? Am I upside down? But anyway, there are modes for you to say what you want to do in all those different states. So anyway, you can detect orientation, what the current one is, as well as there's an event that tells you when orientation changes. The last one is there are multiple modes or 3 modes that your app can be in. It can be the only app being displayed. It can own every pixel. It can own most of the pixels in filled mode. And typically your UI between filled and full is the same. Or it can be snapped. And typically you want to do something different in snapped. You can think of in snapped, you probably want a vertical display of your content versus in full screen or filled, you typically want a horizontal display. So I'm going to do, I think the last demo I got here is just to touch on go back to the list view control and say, okay, let's add one more view to this app. And it's going to be, surprisingly, I'm going to add a list view control, which what a list view does is it's, that's what I just added this right here. A list view is, you can think of more vertically oriented, bound to the same set of data, bound to the same item template that I used before. So again, new control, but works with all the same techniques. By default, I'm hiding it, but that's really the main thing here. Otherwise, it's just bound to the same thumbnail template. And what I want to do is I want to come in and hook that change to tell when I go into a snap state. And so that's, I think I had application layout.get for current view.layout. I got it. Layout change. This tells me when my view changes, and I added an event handler, and all I'm going to do, boy, just not my day. Plus equals, there we go. There it is. And all I want to do in here is display that list view when I'm in the snapped view. And the code is pretty simple, but I'm going to drag it over anyway. And so what it says is, hey, if I'm in snap view, display my list view. Otherwise, in full view, display the grid view. That's it. So let me just show you how this works. F5 to run the app. So I just hooked one event. Now I'm dragging in. I'm swiping in from the left-hand side. I see Visual Studio there. And you'll notice here that what the desktop does is it gives me a vertical view of my content when it's in snap state. So let me keep dragging on over, get to that list view, and bang. Now I got, really simply, got the exact same, using my same data template that I showed originally for that list box. I'm now using that right here in my vertically oriented view. And I'll go back and click. And now I'm back to my normal view. So real simple. Shift F5. And now, last couple things I want to cover. Oh, for testing the different layouts, testing different DPI settings, orientations. There's a simulator in Visual Studio that was showed yesterday afternoon in the last session, but Tim Hewer really is going to cover techniques and how to do this in his talk later on this week. 2 other points that I want to talk about quickly is that there's a set of charms that have been talked about in pretty much all the general sessions. There's search, and there are a couple sessions that go into more details, but the reason I bring these up is that sometimes you as an app, you need to, in some cases, register that you want to, in some way, say you want to participate in search or share, and in some cases, you need to display UI in response to that. And so we have sessions that talk about how that contract works and how you respond appropriately to how you say, hey, I want to participate in search, and how you display UI as a result of participating in search. So if someone searches your app for some term, you can display the appropriate UI. And Marco's going to talk about that in his talk next, but there's actually 2 talks that talk about that. Share is another one. Marco will talk about this in more detail in his next talk, but there's another talk that does nothing but talk about share. Devices, this is like how you connect to a Play 2 device or a printer. Chapal is going to talk a little bit about it, and there's another talk that talks about this as well, but that's how you take your content and say, hey, I want to display it on a DLNA device. And then there's app settings as well, and there is a hands-on XAML lab that talks about how you'd integrate with app settings, and you can think of what app settings are things like if you want to say, hey, I want to default to having no sound for my game. You would do that in app settings, but the hands-on lab actually walks you through how to do that. There are also capabilities, so if you're building a XAML app and it talks to the network, you actually need to go into the app manifest and say, hey, my app needs network resources, and this is something that when the app is deployed, it'll say to the user, hey, this app uses blah, blah, and blah, is that okay? And anyway, you need to specify that there, but if you don't, you'll get exceptions, like if you're accessing the file system. I only mention this because I'm pretty sure at some point in time, if you're developing a Metro-style app, you'll run into something where you go, well, why didn't that work? And it's just because you didn't set the capability in the app manifest that said, hey, I want my app to be able to access the file system. So last thing that I'm going to touch on is the app process lifetime, and Marco will talk about this more in his session, but the main thing is that the foreground app is the app that's getting all the attention. The app that's not in the foreground is, after 5 seconds, it's suspended. And the app gets notified that it's suspended, but at some point in time, due to system resources, the app may actually be terminated. So why that matters is that sometimes you're interacting with an app, and all of a sudden I need to do something else, and you go switch over, do something else, and you forget about your other app. What may happen is that app may get suspended and then terminated. So if you're the app author for that app, that means when that app gets suspended, you need to be saving state so that when the user restores that app, that app is back in the correct state. So you can think of, I'm playing a chess game against the computer, all of a sudden, my boss walks in, I need to get to work, so I switch over to my real work, and I forget about that I was playing chess, and at some point in time, that app got torn down. When I bring it back up, I'd like to have my app restored with the same game in the same state before, and so as it gets suspended, you should save state. And there are actually 2 talks that talk about this in more detail. First of all, there's a set of events that you can respond to, but the techniques for dealing with this, Marco's talking about in his session following mine, but Ben Sroor, he's got a session you can watch on demand because it's going on next door where he talks about nothing but app lifecycle. So finally, with 3 minutes to go, have fun. It's a pre-release version of the product, so we know there's going to be some occasionally rough edges. Occasionally, someone will have a less than ideal experience. That's okay. I want to hear about it, so please send us feedback, and there's a way to send us feedback on a few slides from here. But we do. We want to hear about it. We want to hear both good, bad, what things you'd like to see different. Please tell us. And related sessions, et cetera, you can find this on my slide deck. The Dev Center is live, so the forums are already live. There's already content out there. There's samples out there. Feel free to go peruse those. And finally, thank you, and here are the links to feedback and sessions. Thank you. And so one last thing, there won't be Q&A because I don't have time, but I will be in the, I'll stay around here for a couple minutes, but I will be in the lounge all week. So whatever your questions are, however painful they might be for you to ask them, feel free to stop by and ask them. Thanks. Hello.